After waking up in the hospital, he thinks about giving up, but an unexpected visit changes everything. Carlos had always been a fighter, but when his health landed him in the hospital, everything seemed to fall apart. With his beloved food truck at risk, the future felt like a huge question mark. That's when Lucas, his estranged son, returns to take charge and try to save what remains. Carlos slowly opened his eyes, feeling an almost unbearable weight on his body, as if trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The hospital bed felt harder than anything he had ever experienced. The white ceiling was a distant blur, and he blinked several times until the surroundings came into focus. The fluorescent lights flickered in sync with the monitors, and the hurried footsteps in the hallways echoed, filling his foggy mind. A persistent buzzing in his head made it difficult to understand what was happening. He felt a sharp pain shooting through his chest, and as he tried to move, a searing sting radiated through his abdomen. He let out a groan, more out of surprise than pain. "Where am I? What happened to me?" he thought, trying to push away the growing panic. A soft sound of footsteps approached, and soon a nurse appeared at the door. She had a gentle smile, one of those that tries to reassure you even when something serious needs to be said. Her eyes, however, couldn't hide the concern. She approached delicately, adjusting the blanket over him. "Mr. Carlos, it's good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" Her voice was comforting, like a melody, but Carlos sensed a note of caution. He tried to speak, but his throat felt as if it were covered in sand. He coughed and pointed to a cup of water on the bedside table. The nurse quickly brought it over and helped him drink a few sips. Each drop burned as it went down, but it eased the dryness in his mouth. His voice came out hoarse, hesitant. What happened? Where am I?" The nurse, still holding his hand, sighed softly before answering. "You collapsed while working. You fainted in front of your food truck. They brought you here unconscious, and we ran some tests to figure out what's going on." Carlos blinked, trying to absorb the information. He remembered serving his last customers, preparing the orders with his usual care, and then everything went black. Now the word test echoed in his mind. He tried to move, but another wave of pain paralyzed him. The silence was broken by the door opening again, this time revealing a doctor with a serious expression and a folder full of papers. He walked over to Carlos' bed and stopped beside the nurse, observing him for a moment before speaking. "Mr. Carlos, I'm Dr. Enrique. We need to talk about your health." He sat in a chair next to the bed, leaning in closer to Carlos, like someone who wanted to be both heard and understood. Carlos felt his heart race. It was getting harder to breathe. The doctor's words floated in the room before finally reaching him. I'm in trouble, aren't I?" he risked, his voice thick with anxiety. His mind was caught between the fear of what was to come and the need to know the truth. The doctor nodded, as if searching for the right words. Finally, he took a deep breath and began. "Your kidneys have failed, Mr. Carlos. You have a condition called chronic renal failure. We need to start dialysis immediately while you wait on the transplant list. I know this is hard to hear, but the waiting list can be long, and your health will need constant attention from now on." Carlos felt the ground disappear beneath him. The words renal failure, dialysis, and transplant echoed in his head, weighing down on him like stones. Each one felt like it was pulling him deeper into unfamiliar waters. His eyes filled with tears, but he tried to hold them back. Swallowing hard, he looked at the doctor with a mix of desperation and disbelief. "But what about my work, my food truck?" He tried to keep his voice steady, but the emotion made it come out shaky. "I need to go back. It's my life, my livelihood." The doctor kept his expression calm, but there was a sadness in his gaze. "I understand how difficult this is, Mr. Carlos. You must be a hard-working man. But now your focus has to be on your health. Dialysis will take time and energy. I won't say it will be easy, but we're here to help you through this." Carlos lowered his head, feeling the tears finally spill down his face. For 20 years, the food truck had been his life, his purpose. He knew every customer by name, knew their preferences by heart. The smell of the meals he prepared was more than just work. It was his identity. And now, all of that was being threatened by an illness he hadn't even known he had. The nurse, noticing the despair in his eyes, gently squeezed his hand. "We'll take it one step at a time, Mr. Carlos. I know it's scary, but you don't have to face this alone." She offered a smile, a gesture of compassion that felt genuine. Carlos nodded, unable to find words. Reality felt distant, as if it wasn't his own life being described. And amidst the storm of information and emotions, he knew only one thing. His world had changed forever, and he had no idea how to cope with it. In the days that followed, still in the hospital, Carlos endured his first dialysis sessions. With each procedure, he felt weaker, as if the machine was draining not only the excess fluids from his body but also his vitality. The visits to his room became an almost unbearable routine, a constant reminder of his fragility. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind took him back to the food truck, to the park where he used to park, to the smell of hot meals and the laughter of customers. These were memories that now slipped away like sand between his fingers. However, amidst the pain and uncertainty, he still held on to a silent hope that somehow he would find a way to be the man he had always been. A man not defined by his illness, but by his passion for his work and his determination to move forward, even when everything around him seemed to be falling apart. And there, alone in the hospital room, Carlos could hardly imagine that an unexpected visit would change the course of his story. Carlos lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling as if he could find answers in the faded paint marks. His mind wandered, lost between memories and worries piling up like a storm. The medical bills loomed like dark shadows, a constant threat to his future, along with the thought of selling his beloved food truck. A heavy sigh escaped his lips, echoing in the silent room. He felt alone, abandoned to the mercy of uncertainty. But that afternoon, a surprise awaited him. The door to his room opened, and a figure he barely recognized entered slowly. Lucas, his only son, appeared there, a bit thinner and with a face marked by concern. He brought with him the air of the big city, the fast pace of someone who had left an entire life behind to be there. "Dad, I came as soon as I heard." Lucas's voice was thick with emotion as he held his father's hand, feeling his cold skin. His tear-filled eyes tried to hide his worry. "How are you?" Carlos, trying to appear strong, forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed the pain he felt. I'm alive, son. But honestly, I don't know for how much longer." His voice was a whisper, as if admitting it out loud made the situation more real. "They said I need a kidney transplant. And until then, well, I can't work anymore. I think I'll have to sell the food truck." The mention of the food truck made Lucas's heart sink. He had always known how much that business meant to his father. It wasn't just a way to make a living. It was a part of Carlos's soul, something he had built with his own hands and that carried the pride of a life of honest work. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts and the wave of emotions rushing through him. He knelt beside the bed, squeezing his father's hand harder, and at that moment, a decision formed in his mind. "Dad, you're not going to sell the food truck." The words came out of his mouth firmly, almost surprising them both. "I'll take care of it for you." Carlos looked at him in surprise, a mixture of hope and doubt crossing his tired face. His voice trembled, almost as if apologizing. "Lucas, no. You have your life, your job. I don't want you to sacrifice everything for me. It's not fair." Lucas held his father's gaze, determined. "Dad, I've already made my choice. You've always been strong for me, and now it's my turn. I want to be here for you. I won't let this illness take away what you love." He smiled, trying to lighten the mood, though his voice still carried weight. "And maybe, by taking care of the food truck, I can keep a part of you there until you're ready to come back." Lucas's words were like a balm to Carlos's heart, and the tears he had held back for so long finally fell. It was a mix of pain and gratitude, of fear and hope. "Thank you, son," Carlos whispered, squeezing Lucas's hand with all the strength left in his body. "I don't know if I deserve this, but thank you." Lucas forced a smile, blinking away his own tears. "You deserve it, Dad. And we'll get through this together, I promise." With that promise, father and son began to build a new bond, one that resonated as a thread of hope in the midst of darkness. In Carlos's heart, There were still many uncertainties, but now he wouldn't face them alone. And as Lucas stayed by his side, Carlos felt that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to win the battle ahead. Lucas's decision had been made, but adapting to the new reality wasn't easy. He left behind the big city, where he had built his career as a lawyer, and plunged into the world of the food truck, a universe he only knew from his father's stories. On the first day, Carlos watched from his hospital bed as Lucas tried to understand the complexities of the small space in the mobile kitchen. Lucas woke up before dawn, his fingers numb with the morning cold, preparing the ingredients as he had seen Carlos do countless times. It was a constant learning process, full of trial and error, but he persisted. The first week was especially tough. The customers, who had known Carlos for decades, looked at Lucas with a mix of curiosity and expectation. "Where's your father, kid?" asked an elderly woman while grabbing a coffee. "He'll be back soon, right?" The question was an open wound in Lucas's heart, but he always answered with a smile, trying to make it seem genuine. "He's recovering, but I promise the food still tastes just as good as before." At night, Lucas returned home exhausted, his hands covered in cuts and calluses. At home, Carlos waited for him with a tired but genuine smile. It had become their new ritual. Lucas helped him get comfortable in bed, brought him the soup he had prepared, and sat with him during the dialysis sessions. With each gesture, a new connection was forming between father and son, something they hadn't felt in many years. "I never wanted you to go through this, Lucas," Carlos said one night, his voice low, almost a whisper in the dark. "I never wanted my illness to bring you back to this life I chose for myself." Lucas moved closer and held his father's hand, feeling the bond between them blossom in a new and unexpected way. "Dad, I'm here because I want to be, not because I'm forced to. When I was a kid, you always taught me to be strong. Now it's my turn to give back, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." Carlos smiled, and for a moment, the hospital room seemed less cold, less lonely. There, in the dim light of that night, father and son found a way to reconnect, to lean on each other amid the hardships. It was a quiet but strong hope that began to shine between them. And so, between the long nights of work and the days of care at the hospital, Lucas learned to not only substitute for Carlos in the food truck, but to carry on his father's legacy. Little by little, the customers began to warm up to him, seeing in his gestures and dedication a glimpse of the man they had admired for so long. It was still hard, it was still painful, but Lucas felt he was starting to find his place, both in the food truck and in his father's life. Days passed, and Lucas began to feel more overwhelmed with each passing one. The work at the food truck was demanding, and caring for Carlos was no less exhausting. Despite the support from the community, the weight of responsibilities made him feel as though he was sinking into a sea of worries. He barely managed to sleep, constantly fearing what the future might hold for both of them. Then, one gray afternoon, the doorbell of Carlos's house rang. Lucas opened the door to find Anna, a childhood friend he hadn't seen in years. Her smile was like a ray of sunshine cutting through the clouds of worry that hung over the house. Without hesitation, she hugged him, feeling the tension in his body. "Lucas, I came as soon as I heard," Anna said, observing his tired face. "You need help, and I won't stand by while my friend goes through all of this." Lucas tried to hide his exhaustion, but his voice betrayed him. The relief he felt at seeing her there was unexpected. "Anna, I don't know what to do anymore. The food truck, my dad, I just want him to feel okay. To not think he's a burden." Anna smiled, softly touching his shoulder. "So let me help, Lucas. We'll find a way. How about taking the food truck to events? I know there are craft fairs and festivals around here. I can manage the social media and help with the marketing. What do you think?" Lucas thought about her idea, and for a moment the weight on his shoulders seemed a little lighter. The prospect of trying something new with someone he trusted by his side was exactly what he needed. "Let's do it, Anna. And thank you. Seriously, I don't know what I would do without you." With Anna by his side, the routine at the food truck gained a new rhythm. They started attending local craft fairs, neighborhood festivals, and even events in nearby towns. Anna, with her talent for creating innovative dishes and her contagious energy, breathed new life into the business, attracting new customers. Lucas, on the other hand, handled the customer service, finding his own style of interacting with the clientele. Together, they managed to increase revenue, which helped cover Carlos's medical expenses. He watched all of it with a mix of pride and emotion. "You have a special friend, Lucas," Carlos remarked one day, watching Anna serve customers with a broad smile. "I don't know how to thank her." Lucas smiled, feeling warmth in his chest. "She's amazing, Dad, and I think she's brought some light into these dark days." As Anna and Lucas worked side by side, their longtime friendship began to take on new shades. What was once a relationship of companionship was transforming into something deeper, a connection that brought comfort and hope in the midst of chaos. And there, in that unexpected reunion, Lucas began to feel that perhaps, just perhaps, the future held something better for all of them. Seemed to drag for Carlos, but little by little, a glimmer of hope began to emerge amidst the whirlwind of uncertainties. The experimental treatment in Boston, which initially seemed like a long shot, started to show signs of improvement. With each session, he felt his body responding, even if only in subtle ways. After a long time, he was able to walk short distances without the excruciating pain that had once brought him to a halt. The doctors were cautious but optimistic. During consultations, they spoke about the positive reactions his body was having to the treatment, and every word of encouragement felt like a breath of fresh air to Carlos. Lucas and Anna remained by his side, helping him through the tough days and the seemingly endless hospital visits. Lucas and Anna also found a new routine in Boston, balancing hospital visits with running the food truck. With help from some friends they met during Carlos's treatment, they kept the business going, not only managing to pay their expenses but also maintaining a connection with their community back home. One cold afternoon, after a busy day at a local festival, Carlos called Lucas and Anna for a serious conversation. They sat beside him in a quiet area of the hospital, surrounded by trees swaying gently in the wind. Carlos's face was marked by fatigue, but there was a peacefulness in his eyes. "Lucas, Anna, I've been thinking a lot these past few days. I know I'm getting better, but there's still a long road ahead." His voice was shaky but resolute. "I just want to thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for everything you've done for me. You've given me a reason to keep fighting." Anna took Carlos's hand, her eyes gleaming with genuine emotion. "Carlos, you're a part of our lives. We're not here out of obligation. We're here because we want to be like a family." She smiled, trying to lighten the mood, then glanced at Lucas with a mischievous glint. "And I think Lucas has something to tell you, something that will make you proud." Carlos looked at his son with an intrigued expression. "What are you up to, kid?" he teased, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. Lucas looked at Anna, then back at his father, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Anna and I have a plan. When we get back home, we want to open a restaurant. Not just a food truck, but a bigger space where we can build on what you started. We want you to see your legacy grow, Dad." He smiled, and the confidence in his voice reflected how much he had grown over the past few months. Carlos sat in silence, absorbing the news. For a moment, it seemed as though all his worries had vanished. His eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of joy. "I never imagined that old food truck could turn into something like this," he murmured, his voice trembling. "Just promise me one thing, Lucas." Lucas leaned in, listening closely. "I'll promise you anything, Dad. Promise me that when that restaurant opens, you'll reserve a special spot for me, somewhere I can sit, have my coffee, and watch you both shine." Lucas and Anna laughed, and Lucas nodded with tear-filled eyes. "I promise, Dad. That spot is already yours." With that promise, Carlos's heart filled with renewed hope. A new chapter was opening in their lives, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that there was a future where his illness wasn't the only star of the show. Months passed since the start of the experimental treatment, and Carlos's life continued to improve. Though the challenges were many, He was now able to go on short walks through the streets of Boston with Lucas and Anna by his side, something that had seemed impossible just months earlier. Every step was a victory, and he made sure to celebrate each achievement with a timid but grateful smile. While Carlos focused on his recovery, Lucas and Anna worked to turn their dream of a restaurant into reality. Using part of their savings and the experience gained from running the food truck at events, they began to design every detail of the new establishment. It was exhausting work but filled with hope. They wanted to create a welcoming atmosphere where memories of the food truck would be preserved but with a modern touch reflecting the future. One afternoon, as Lucas and Anna were organizing paperwork for the new restaurant, the phone rang in the small apartment they shared. It was Carlos's doctor, delivering news that felt like a miracle. A compatible donor had been found. The possibility of a transplant, which once seemed like a distant dream, now became a tangible reality. The news brought a mix of relief and anxiety to everyone. Lucas tried to hide his nervousness, but Anna noticed his trembling hands as he held the phone. She approached him, intertwining her fingers with his, offering him the security he so desperately needed. On the night before the surgery, Carlos, Lucas, and Anna sat together in the apartment, the silence filled with unspoken emotions. Carlos finally broke the silence, his voice low and trembling. "I'm scared, Lucas," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the window, where the city seemed to shine with new possibilities. "But I also have this overwhelming desire to live so I can see you two fulfill this dream, to live to meet the grandchildren you'll give me one day." Lucas took a deep breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. He held his father's hand tightly, feeling the deep connection that bound them. "Dad, I'm scared too, but I know you'll make it. We've been through so much, and now this is our chance to see a better future." Anna, sitting next to them, smiled softly with a gleam in her eyes. "And no matter what happens tomorrow, we'll be together. We're a family, remember? Nothing's going to change that." Carlos smiled, deeply moved, and closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the comfort of having them by his side. "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep going." The surgery was tense, but Lucas and Anna stayed by Carlos's side every step of the way. The hours at the hospital felt like an eternity until the doctor finally emerged from the operating room with a discreet smile. The surgery was a success. Carlos will have a long recovery ahead, but his body is accepting the new kidney well. Lucas let out a deep sigh, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. He hugged Anna, and the tears he had been holding back for so long finally flowed. "He did it, Anna. He did it," he whispered, his smile wide with relief. Carlos's recovery was slow, but with every step outside the hospital, he felt life gaining new meaning. When they finally returned to their small town, they found the restaurant in its final stages of preparation. Carlos, though still weak, insisted on visiting the site every day, offering his thoughts on the decor, tasting new dishes, and most importantly, feeling that he was still part of the dream. A few months later, the restaurant opened on a special night filled with customers, friends, and family. The space was a tribute to the old food truck, but with a new life, a new energy. Carlos, seated in the special spot Lucas had promised, watched the activity with a serene smile. That same night, Lucas and Anna surprised Carlos with news that brought tears to the old cook's eyes. They were expecting a baby. The emotion on Carlos's face was indescribable, and he hugged them with a strength he hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't know if I deserve all this, but I'm so grateful, so grateful. You are my pride, my reason to smile," he said, his voice thick with emotion, as he looked around at the bustling restaurant. What had started as a tragedy turned into a story of overcoming, reunion, and renewal. Carlos knew the challenges weren't over, but now he had a family by his side who loved him and was ready to face anything with him. And with a grandchild on the way, he felt that life, despite all its hardships, still had many reasons for him to believe in better days ahead.